That's what it is.
I mean, it's just same old.
It
Like,
is. True.
All right, let's go ahead and call the June 12th Planning Board meeting to order. Please bow your heads for the invocation. Father God, thank you for the opportunity to come together to represent the town of Apex. Give us the wisdom to make the decisions best suited for the town. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amanda, do we have any items of information today?
Today.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to talk briefly about the public comment section. The public comment section is allowed to the public to speak on items that don't appear on the public agenda. Any members of the public wishing to comment or on public hearing items will be called later in the appropriate time in the agenda section. If you've not done so already, please sign in. My right, your left, for those items. Public comment period is an opportunity for the public to express concerns or opinions, but is not intended to be a question and answer session. During public comment, the public may comment on any non-public hearing item, including new business that appears in this agenda. Comments from the public on new business items will not be taken later in the agenda, so if you wish to speak on the new business items, public comment is the time to do so. All comments must be limited to 3 minutes. When 3 minutes are up, I will ask you to wrap up your comments. If there's a large number in the audience, you want to have a representative, you can get a total of 9 minutes on that single topic, and it should not be repetitive in nature. So item number 1 is the minutes from the May 8th, 2023 regular meeting. I don't know if you've all have read them or not. I'd like to get a motion to pass these minutes.
I'll make a motion.
A motion from Ms. Sherman. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. And second from Mr. Royal. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, that passes unanimously. So now we're going to move on to the public hearing section. Item number 1. Liz is going to talk to us about a possible rezoning case, 23 CZ09-940, Tingen Road.
Reggie,
Yes.
the Gentrys are here to speak on a non-agenda item.
Oh, I apologize. You did tell me that, and I got that quick. Mr. and Mrs. Gentry, would you like to come forward?
Right. My name's William Gentry. I live at 8528 Reagan Road in Apex, or just outside the territorial limits of Apex. My wife and I own the property there, and we've been residents there since the early 1990s. I've learned, incidentally, that through studying y'all's advanced planning, that they're planning what's called the Reagan Road side path to come down the side of Reagan Road and go right through the middle of my property. When I bought the place, my deed didn't say anything about the roadway or pathway or anything going through my property and cutting it in half. It's a 6.65 acre lot, and it is designated National Registry Historic, as well as state and county historic property. I can't make any changes to the property or the outside of the house without approval from the Historic Commission, and neither can anyone else. I've talked with the planning manager, Angela Ranke, about that, and I've offered a couple of different alternatives rather than cutting my property in half with this proposed pathway, and I haven't gotten any response. So I want to present it to the board and see if you guys would be interested in entertaining other possibilities than taking probably $500,000 off the value of my property. I realize that you guys got a big job on your hands with the expansion of Apex, and as well as preserving private property ownership rights, which is what this country is founded on, the ownership of private property. My next door neighbor too has a big concern, but he couldn't be here tonight. The proposed pathway is going to go down the side of his property and beside a pond, and he's really worried about a child or somebody getting off the pathway and getting in the pond and drowning. There's copperhead snakes and snapping turtles in that pond. So, but I've got two other proposals that would make a lot more sense and being less invasive. One is already an established roadway called Stick Barn Lane, and it goes all the way over to where the tobacco trail is. That's their purpose, is to connect to the tobacco trail. I realize that what's behind this is the residents of an additional neighborhood called Stillwater have signed a petition to try to get this pathway through there. The American Tobacco Trail, we used to let our neighbors go through there and hike and stuff, but the American Tobacco Trail itself asked us to stop doing that. They didn't want people coming through and connecting with the trail there, and they put up bollards and screens and everything to prevent that. And since then, there's been a lot of angst from these new residents in Stillwater about going through. And I don't want it for liability for me. And
We own the property.
we actually own it. DOT abandoned that roadway when Jordan Lake was built, and they turned the easement back over to us in writing and said, it's your property. And my deed doesn't say anything about a roadway through there. In fact, the old roadway, it was never Reagan Road, it was New Hill Road, but they named it Reagan. The old roadway used to go all the way through before Lake Jordan and connect with Highway 751, and that was called New Hill Roadway. But it turned right at my mailbox and went right in front of my house too, and it was called Pittsboro Roadway. So that's historical. But those have long been abandoned. And for the town to force a pathway through when there's other alternatives. I've even suggested to Ms. Ranke that I wouldn't object if they wanted to go around my property, along the property lines. But I haven't gotten any response to any of that. Ms. So on the council, what's her name? Sarah So. She, in your May 8th meeting, she questioned whether this pathway was going to impact on any private property. And Angela didn't really answer it except to say, you know, they're taking that into consideration. So thank you for your time.
Mr. Gentry, thank you. I guess we need to have a follow-up conversation to find out with staff. Is there anything additional that can be discussed, or is that already a closed item that was voted on?
We'll share all this information with Angela and
Okay.
ask that she has your contact information.
She won't call us back though. We've left messages and no one returns our calls.
I'll follow up with Angela.
As well as Adam Stevenson.
The engineer.
We will
He
follow
will
up.
not, I've left messages.
I think we've worn out our welcome there, so that's why we're here.
Thank you for bringing it to our attention. We will
Just don't
follow
want
up.
anybody trespassing on our property.
Understood. Thank
We
you.
are looking at alternatives.
Okay.
Yeah, study that area.
Could you include us in the discussion?
Mr. and Mrs. Gentry. My name is Tina Sherman. I'll be following up with Amanda and staff, and see if we can get some expectations on when you can expect to hear. Like, I hear it's being worked on, but I would also like to give you some level of expectation of when you can expect to hear.
Thank you.
So I'll follow up with that first thing tomorrow morning. I'm gonna hop on a plane about midday, but I'll follow up that with first thing tomorrow morning, and hopefully get back. I will hopefully get back to you by the end of the week, with at least some level of expectation about when you can expect. Can't expect any answers, right? But at least
No,
like when the next.
Start a conversation, that's all we
Absolutely.
wanted.
So I will follow up first thing tomorrow morning, and by the end of the week, you'll hear back from me as to when to expect some expectation.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
close the public comment section, and then we'll move forward with item number 1. Liz is going to talk to us about a public hearing and possible motion regarding rezoning case 23 CZ07940 Tingen Road.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This is rezoning case 23CZ07. It is located within the Apex Peakway. It is on the west side of Tingen Road and is currently vacant. As you may recall, this property, the property to the south, was discussed at your December planning board meeting. The applicant did mention they would be back with this property to be rezoned. The developer has submitted a master subdivision plan for the property. And the intent of this rezoning is to include this property with the property to the south. The property is currently zoned residential agriculture. The applicant is proposing to rezone to high-density multifamily conditional zoning. The 2045 land use map designates the property as medium-high density residential. The proposed rezoning to HDMF is consistent with the land use map. The applicant conducted a neighborhood meeting on March 30th. This rezoning was exempt from meeting with the Apex Environmental Advisory Board since the proposed rezoning is less than 1 acre. A full list of the uses and conditions can be found on page 2 of the staff report. The applicant is proposing townhomes. I would like to point out that the zoning conditions are all the same as the adjacent rezoning to the south, except for condition number 11. The property shall be developed with the adjacent property to the south. Planning staff can recommend approval because the proposed rezoning is consistent with the land use map classification and will expand the area available for affordable housing and encourage compatible development. And myself and the applicant are here to answer any questions that you may have.
Liz, I want to clarify one thing you said. You said staff can approve, influence, yes? Is
Yes.
agreeing? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
Any questions for Liz? The applicant want to speak?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Board, Jeff Roach, Peak Engineering and Design. Good to see you guys today. I'll be real quick here. This is exactly what we told you guys we were going to do in December. The property owner was going after this 0.2 of an acre piece. He has now acquired the property and has, we've already submitted the master subdivision plan for 100% affordable housing development on this piece, along with the 2.2 acres next door. So it will be, a Habitat for Humanity, a White Oak Foundation, something like that, that does pure 100% affordable housing. So we followed staff. We are basically delivering on a discussion we had back in December with both you guys, as well as the approval on January 10th from Town Council to support the project. So I'm here tonight just really to answer questions and tell you guys we're doing exactly the same thing that's happening next door, and we're back to say we did it. We acquired the property. So with that, I'll open up to any questions you guys have. And yes, sir, Mr. Akers.
Where are you at in the process with the parent track, like without this?
We actually included this track in the master subdivision submittal process. We made our submittal on May 1st for the master subdivision plan, and we will get our first round of comments back the end of this month. And the property, assuming it's approved here and approved by council the end of the month, the master subdivision and CDs will continue through the process. So
The reason I was questioning this, there's been a lot of neighborhood concern about the stormwater, and I remember bringing that up during the case because you've got a very narrow corridor between two townhomes,
Correct,
and there's a 36-inch pipe,
correct.
and there's like a lot of pipes pointed towards it. So what are you guys doing about storm?
We've got the pond just north of it. Our site, the natural drainage comes off the school, follows that path down. We have a report from staff about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And what we're doing now is we're getting, and the way we typically do our master subdivision, we make our first submittal as we're evaluating the site. We're getting comments back from staff, and then we are full bore into, 10, 25-year stormwater controls, water quality controls. Can we make our pond bigger to assist with the downstream storm system that we hear is having concerns? We've got some emails from staff that were relayed from, I think, Ms. Fritz. She's here again. So, and I sent you an email, but I never heard back from you. And oh, I'm sorry. No, that's fine. I'll send you an email tomorrow. Yeah, I'll send you an email tomorrow. We sent an email after the zoning was approved back in January to start the conversations, because we do have pictures from staff showing that pipe. We haven't run all the numbers yet, Mr. Akers, to see if it's undersized, what we can do about it. Is it better to extend it farther north onto our site? We're still going through a lot of design questions about what's best. So first master subdivision, as you know,
Sure.
we don't usually get that far into details.
You are studying.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. Please don't take this wrong. I don't want to hear from Ms. Fritz after it's built that we're flooding. That's the worst phone call that I could ever get. So absolutely, we're looking at it through the master subdivision and the CD designs. So it's not lost on us that it's an issue downstream.
And I assume you'll keep Ms. Fritz.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did I say your name correct?
Yeah, that's right. Ms. Fritz. Yeah. And she's probably gonna get up too.
Yep.
So yeah. So we'll continue to work with her as we get through the process. I just need a little latitude until the end of this month. Once we get our first round of comments back, then we're full bore into probably construction drawings, plan and profiles, grading, fine grading for the site. So a little bit of update. Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Roach?
Thank you, guys.
Do we have anybody in the public who wants to speak?
I'm sorry.
All right.
Hi.
Have you already signed in, ma'am?
Yes.
All right, great, thank you.
Sorry, I might get a little stage fright here. My name is Patricia Fritz. I live at 206 Harbor Haven Drive in the town, one of the townhome buildings that are adjacent to the property that JBI Construction is going to develop for Habitat for Humanity. And back when the first rezoning request came, we submitted a lot of comments, or I submitted comments about the water that flows down through that drainage area right close to two of our buildings and flows down and out past the gas line easement further on down. And I resubmitted all those comments again, plus some newer pictures that shows the amount of water that flows down through there. And those pictures were taken after those storms in April, which weren't really very long, but you can see how close they are to the building. And that water is probably 3 feet deep when it's flowing hard. So, it's really concerning. I feel like we've got a lot of drainage issues in there. We're downhill from that property line, and there's a lot of water that comes down off that hill that flows down behind the townhomes, in addition to the water that's flowing down through the drainage area off of 1010 Tingen Road. So really, I'm pretty concerned. I mean, I feel concerned about the water now. I feel like there's too much water coming down through as it is. And there's some sand that comes down now. The banks of the stream or water feature there on 1010 Tingen Road is starting to erode, and it's throwing sand down through us and loading up in the lower area of you can probably see it in the pictures, it's where it flattens out. And that used to be a ditch that was probably 2 feet deep, and now it's full up. So, and it's not, can't say it's getting worse. Sometimes it looks like it's washing away some, other times it looks like it's filling back up. But they said, the environmental people with the town said it's probably trying to correct itself. But I do have to say it doesn't seem to be getting any worse, but it pools up some for a while. And also we have noticed we have a tree guy come out, because we have a lot of trees, and there's some dead trees that I think are probably right on the property line. I'm not 100% sure where the property line is, but we have a surveyor coming out so he can tell us. But I'm a little concerned about the wind drag on those big trees that are going to be left in the buffer zone. after they tear down the rest of the woods and put up buildings. And also with the right in and right out, that's gonna there's 20 townhomes proposed, so figure 2 cars each, that's 40 vehicles that are gonna be turning right, going right in front of our exit entryway on Harbor Haven Drive, and there's a little curve there, so it's really difficult to see as it is now, cars coming, and it's gonna make our entering and exiting to the townhome hard. So those are really our major concerns, and I appreciate all the help from the town and cooperation from JVI Construction, and just really, the water is really the main thing that is, I think it's quite a hazard for us now, and any kind of water coming down through that is gonna, in addition to what comes now, is
Thank you, Ms. Fritz.
hard. Thank you very much.
Any other public comments? All right, I will close the public comment section, bring it back to the board for discussion and a possible motion.
Can I ask town staff, I'm grateful that there's conversation that's happening, and both with Mr. Roach and the town about the stormwater. Can we assure Ms. Fritz that will continue? I'm looking around. that will continue, that correction might be happening, but with additional disruption, concerns about just, monitoring it and what the expectation can be for, how long we let the correction happen versus, putting in an intervention.
I'm gonna defer to our.
Yep, no, I was doing the same thing.
Come on down.
I don't have any prizes for you today, sorry.
Robert Patterson with Town of Apex Stormwater. Yeah, I mean, the development will have to meet their UDO standards for stormwater and erosion control. Natural streams and stream morphology, there's always some sediment moving. That's always happening. That's just the nature of a natural stream. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it comes down to the development will have to meet our standards, which is what we can, what our authority is for controlling the stormwater.
And
So-
absolutely understood. Would not expect anything less, but again, as things are kind of in transit, the sort of what is the expectation on, if we're, if it's in transit for a little bit and it seems like it's settling, that's one thing. But if we have some shifting and changing, how long do we let it shift and change before we say maybe this doesn't meet UDO, or maybe it's getting pretty close, or like how often do we do those sort of circle backs? And
You referring to the sediment movement in the channel? or-
yes, and just the rise in the water, the difference in the 3 feet, and that we're about to have some disruption. So wondering at what point do we kind of check back and ensure that we're meeting the UDOs? Just trying to set some expectations.
Yeah, I mean,
for Ms.
they'll
Fritz.
have to, at the end of construction, they'll have to submit as-built certifications, the engineer will, for the stormwater controls, to show that they've been actually constructed per the approved design. As for the sediment transport, I mean, the nature of streams, they're constantly shifting and moving. I mean, there's nothing that we can legally even do to restrict that. I mean, without like a Army Corps of Engineer permit. So I'm not sure. When there's not sediment movement in the stream, then there's a really big issue because it'll start cutting down and eroding. So.
Right. I definitely understand this and appreciate the explanation. Just, trying to understand if we're talking, 3 feet versus 5 feet, at what point is that something that the town will circle back and address, or, Mr. Rich will circle back, like at what point? We clearly have some concerns here, and I'm trying to ward off the, and if you're telling me that there isn't, that's that is something that we need to know and Ms. Fritz needs to know.
Yeah, I mean, we don't measure sediment depths in the channels or anything like that.
I'm not necessarily talking about sediment, I'm talking about rise in water and flowing
Oh,
water.
I mean,
In general, I'm just, again,
Yeah, I mean,
if there's a water issue, so I maybe should be clear. If there is a water issue and we have, 3 feet of water, 5 feet of water, at what point are we concerned about that as a town and then need to work towards a solution, or are we not?
So part of the requirements in the UDO are a downstream analysis. We call it like the 10% point for the drainage area. So part of that is the engineer will have to look at those downstream potential impacts and either show that there is no negative impact, or if there is, what needs to be done to correct that. So, I mean, part of the design is based on peak flows for the standard is 1 in 10-year storm events. So those will have to be mitigated on the site before discharging into there. Anything above that would be, that's over and above the UDO, unless, yeah.
And then so if it's over 10%, there would be some correction made. And if something happened after the site design is complete and approval has been made, what is the next step from there? Again, asking for Ms. Fritz. I want to make sure there's some understanding of what the process is in case, again, things are moving, there's going to be construction.
I mean, I'm not sure how to, I mean, again, we review it per the UDO requirements. The engineer designs it and seals the calculations and plans that it meets that requirement. Then they as-built it. So at that point, if they've met the UDO requirements, there's not anything the town can do to make them do anything beyond that.
Okay. I have heard of the town coming back out and doing some correction. That's purely anecdotal. Am I not correct in understanding that is possible?
I mean, if there is, so there has been times where there's like a town road gets put in or something like that, where if that negatively affects something downstream.
No, I'm not
then
talking about
that's,
I'm literally talking about a berm and a stream that has built up with sediment, and the town has come back and corrected. I can think of several neighbors.
Okay.
And I live on the western side of town. I can think of several neighbors on the western side of town and new developments that have called the town and had this happen. Again, purely anecdotal.
If it's not in a public right-of-way or public easement, the town is not allowed to go in and do work on private property. So, I mean, if it was something in a public drainage easement, then yeah,
I think
the
they
town
may
would be
have been public
required
drainage
to,
easements.
yeah.
Okay. And I don't know, is that what, are we talking about a public drainage easement, Ms. Fritz?
I don't,
There is a sewer easement there. But
Okay.
I think that's all private drainage, yeah.
then I think that town does take some responsibility for the road and the pipe that 10 feet out from the pipe that goes under the road. I don't know.
Oh, it could be, yeah, there could be, if it's a public road,
Yeah, it is.
yeah, there
in
could be
Harbor
some
Haven,
limited, yeah.
public road.
Okay.
And there's some sand building up in there too. But it doesn't, it kind of seems to come and go. It seems like it's a little less and then it builds up. I don't know, but.
I mean, that's all, again, that natural stream morphology. I mean, if you get a really intense short duration storm, it may wash some of that sediment downstream. If you get a kind of a nicer, steady, slow rain event, then you don't have the velocities in the stream to carry that sediment.
It doesn't seem to be really washing, maybe the top of it, but it doesn't go down too much, really.
So it sounds like there needs to maybe be more conversation with town and what the current situation is as we go into the development.
I mean, I've been out there personally, and my experience, there wasn't any visible issue. I mean, again, it's a natural stream. It's supposed to have sediment in there. It's supposed to have sediment transport. There's nothing, there wasn't any indication of head cutting or any severe erosion or incising of the channel, so I'm not sure.
The sand is not building up near the buildings, that it's on the other side of the road, in the area that, you know, has kind of held down to it, that goes into the woods. The where it flattens out and gets deep is where it comes off the property of 1010 Tingen. Because, you know, it's, because of the way they built our drainage, you know, there's like a little, I don't know, indentation that flows into where the stream comes down, and so it's starting to come up in the air. I mean, it's probably, I bet you it's probably this deep, and I don't know, maybe when it's full, I bet you it's less than 5 feet away from the building, in the corner of the building.
So if I understand correctly, the ask is whether or not we will come back and revisit?
No, so yes, the town. I mean, I think for this purposes, I think we kind of understand where things are. I think it would be great to ensure there's continual conversation. I understand sediment needs to move, but I think there is some current discrepancies, and I'm concerned that, you know, I think Mr. Roach it sounds like he is in communication doing what he can, but I think it sounds like there may be some discrepancy as to what the town can further do with what is currently existing. So therefore, I'm concerned about what the town would do going forward. So if we can continue these conversations, clearly not here, offline, that would be great. And just, you know, as this process continues.
Yeah, I mean, we handle drainage complaints, a whole lot of them every day. So
I completely understand. I'm feeling an unresolved one here, and would be happy to circle back tomorrow.
Okay.
On it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Can I just ask one more question about the pond and maintenance of the pond after?
I think we want to circle back on that
Okay,
one.
I'm sorry. Okay.
All right, so we're gonna bring it back to the board for possible motion.
Did I hear 100% affordable housing? Is that what I heard?
Correct.
Fantastic.
Yes.
We do have the drainage concern, which I'm very empathetic to that. The fact that the studies and the conversations are now beginning and being turned in, that is the positive thing. I think the drainage issue is moving forward.
Yes.
The conversations have started. There'll be engineering drawings, more than likely upgrades. The affordable housing, the townhome, I think that's fantastic, and I'm gonna be voting for approval.
Is that a motion, or?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
So I have a motion, Keith, and a second from Tina. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any dissension? All right, 23CZ07940 passes unanimously. All right, item number 2, Shelley's gonna talk to us about a public hearing and possible motion regarding rezoning case 23CZ09, the Hatcher property revision.
Just real quick, for IT, my computer is not charging, so I'm about to lose power.
Just whisper in the microphone. We'll be out in just a
I
second.
know something will happen if I tell it to the microphone. It's good. Got 4 minutes left.
Here it comes.
Hello, Shelley.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
The project before you is the Hatcher property. This is a revision from the rezoning that was approved in January. You guys saw it in December, right before Christmas. It's located in the western part of the town's jurisdiction, just to the north, or just on north of Olive Chapel and west of the American Tobacco Trail. It consists of 3 parcels that total about 28.8 acres or so. Those parcels are currently zoned rural residential conditional zoning. The proposed rezoning is to stay with the same district, so rural residential conditional zoning, but to amend a couple of the conditions and add 2 additional ones that we discovered after their subdivision plan was turned in. The 2045 land use map designates this as the rural transition residential, and that zoning district is consistent with that. The applicant did conduct a neighborhood meeting on March 15th. That meeting report's attached to your staff report as well. So just like the last rezoning, or the last time this one came in anyway, that's what I meant, not the Tingen Road. The applicant has split the proposed rezoning into two areas. We've got Zone A in red and Zone B in green. Zone A is consists of two parcels that are about 2.5 acres, a little bit bigger, that will only be 2 single-family houses on there. And then Zone B is going to be the remainder of the property and will have a standard, slightly larger lot than usual, but a standard subdivision on it. So that's just to give you an idea. In your staff report, every condition is listed and every use. I'm only going to go over the 4 proposed changes though, because I figure you don't want me to read every single bit of that. So the first of the proposed changes is to strike out on condition number 4, is to strike the words per lot and change them to for this development. So it'll read the maximum built upon area for this development shall be 60%. This condition only affects Zone B, and that's because Zone B is coming in as a regular subdivision, and the UDO already averages maximum built upon area across a subdivision. It's one of the reasons why we have HOA-owned land and RCA, is to help make sure that a subdivision never actually reaches that point where it hits the maximum. It's super rare at the very least. So this change is consistent with how the UDO conducts or calculates impervious surface. So staff has no concerns with this one. The next slide is to amend the condition that was proposed regarding how Transit Trail will be constructed. And if you remember, Transit Trail is being built from Olive Chapel up to the northwesternmost corner of this property by the applicant. The text in front of you, the yellow is what's being proposed. In the last rezoning, the applicant requested that the curb and gutter and sidewalk along the western side of Transit Trail be eliminated because they're not constructing or building anything on that side of the road. At the time that, shortly after this was approved, they realized that they had intended to ask for a 6-foot reduction in the asphalt width of the road. So normally it would be 30 feet of asphalt, and in this case they're asking that that be reduced to a 24-foot wide section of asphalt. Staff was opposed to this request, to this condition when it first came through, just removing the curb and gutter and sidewalk. And we're still opposing this deviation. That's because it's still a deviation from the town standards specs. There are several negative consequences that can go along with this, including that the project just in general will be held to a lower standard than other projects similar. In addition, having a 24-foot wide section means that it can't be striped per the town's specifications, because otherwise, if it was striped per the town's specifications, you would have an 8-foot wide lane on one side and a 16-foot wide lane on the other side, which would just confuse everyone. So in order to balance that, if they ask for a 24-foot wide section, it has to be 2 12-foot wide lanes on each side, which means that when everything's restriped in the event that it widens, you actually have to move 2 instead of just 1 line, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's additional cost to the town. Considering how long this road is, that's pretty significant additional cost to the town. In addition, the shoulder on that western side is going to have to be reduced from 4 feet, which is our preference, to 2 feet, which is the bare minimum approved by DOT. There's some potential for uneven widening on the western side as development occurs, because there are multiple smaller parcels on the western side instead of one large parcel. And the town may have to fill in some gaps in between. So say one property develops and they've widened their section and then skips over another property and a third one down widens. Then there's that. And then the town might eventually have to come in and actually condemn for a piece and then fill that gap in. In addition, just there's going to be some unnecessary disruption in the future for both the owners that are adjacent to it. Instead of being disrupted once while everything's built, they're going to be disrupted multiple times when that's redone, and for any drivers that are coming down through there. Just to give you a visual of what's being asked for, this is the town standard. What's already been approved is removing the sidewalk here, removing this 2.5 feet of curb and gutter here, and now this is being asked for is to remove this additional 6 feet. So this line kind of gives you an idea of how much more uneven that is over here. The next proposed request is a request that we increase the maximum allowed length of a branching cul-de-sac. So the UDO already allows 2 cul-de-sacs that share 1 point of common connection to be 1,200 feet long. The applicant in this case, because there's some concerns about connectivity elsewhere, is asking for that to be increased to 1,450 linear feet. Staff doesn't have a problem with this. There are no connection options to the south because it's got Army Corps land right there. There's no way for them to connect to the east because of the American Tobacco Trail. And just in case there's environmental stuff to the north that means that they can't provide a stub street, this will give them a little bit of extra flexibility. And this UDO section that's being called for is the section in the ordinance that gives flexibility in case there's an environmental feature that can't be crossed. So staff has no concerns about this one. And this, I forgot I had this in here, this picture just illustrates that better. These streams all come from the USGS maps that get used for most of our projects. This is the Army Corps land to the south, the American Tobacco Trail here, and there's a possibility of some streams in this area as well. So allowing that extra flexibility on the cul-de-sacs just seems fairly reasonable to us. Whoops, wrong direction. The final condition is, number 20, is to remove the requirement entirely to construct a street stub to the northern property line. Specifically to, it's difficult to see on this map, but there is a piece of property right here that's landlocked, and that's the PIN, the property ID number that it's referring to, due to potential future environmental impacts on that parcel. So this condition would remove any possible connection to a street stub in Legacy Station PUD. I'll show you a better map of that here in just a minute. When the applicant did an analysis of this project, this parcel was in Wake County's jurisdiction, which means that town staff legally, if it's in Wake County's jurisdiction, can't go out there and evaluate it until after it's been annexed into our jurisdiction. That was done at the same time that the rezoning was done. But the stream buffer analysis was done prior to that. So it's one of those, if you're lining up the blocks on the table, you have to knock one over first before it gets to you. Dominoes, that's the word. So this is the portion of that in dark blue of that stream that was analyzed and reported to Wake County. And according to Wake County, there is no buffered stream out there. So they did not find enough evidence to show that it was either intermittent or perennial. So, and since the town wasn't able to go out and double check that, we rely on Wake County's analysis of that. These two lighter colored sections are also on the USGS's maps. And typically when you see that on a map, there's at least a section on there that says, we didn't find any evidence of these other two stream branches. And after rereading it, we didn't find that information in that stream buffer analysis. So we've requested more information on these two buffered streams because it makes perfect sense that somebody might not want to build a road across two buffered streams. And we wouldn't want them to impact the road that much, but we might be able to find alternative routes if we have that information. We didn't get that information yet, and the applicant knew that they were coming to this rezoning and said, well, let's just add this condition to make sure that we can cross all of our I's or cross all of our T's and dot all of our I's and not have to come back here a third time. The UDO allows the planning director and the water resources director to evaluate whether a stub street is even required to a property if there's an environmental feature that's found. But without any kind of report to determine that, we can't say whether or not there is an environmental feature. And so staff doesn't recommend approval of this right now because we just simply don't have that information. And there's already a mechanism in the UDO for giving us that information and letting us make that determination. So we don't feel that this negatively impacts this particular development because they already have access to the same methods that the rest of the town does. As far as the Legacy PUD connection goes, when Legacy, which is up, I had to turn everything so it would fit. So north is over here on your right. Legacy is directly north of this property. And as you may recall, this came in for apartments here, and there's the potential for a school site here. The red shows the main road through the center and all of the access points that they proposed, including this one here. And our intent when we asked for this for Legacy Station was that it would eventually connect to the south and come kind of curving through there to connect down this way, to provide some more interior connectivity between the different developments. If the condition that we were just talking about, number 20, is approved, then that basically wipes out any potential for us to have that connection happen within Hatcher. The most we could look for is if the Clement properties develop in the future is having that connection go this way, which is less optimal than having it connect through all three potential developments. As proposed, staff does not recommend approval of this rezoning. Instead, we recommend approval of conditions 4 and 19, and we recommend denial of condition 15 and condition 20. The applicant is here and is happy to answer any questions that you may have, and I am also happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Shelley?
Shelley, I do. What was condition 15 as written and as approved with the prior zoning case?
So it would read, if you took out the yellow text, it would read, the developer shall construct transit trail according to the Apex Thoroughfare and Collector Street plan on a 60-foot public right-of-way from Olive Chapel Road to the northernmost property boundary to be dedicated prior to the first plat of subdivision. The developer shall not be required to construct curb and gutter on the west side of transit trail. The east side of transit trail shall be constructed with curb and gutter and a 5-foot sidewalk from Olive Chapel Road to the entrance of the future master subdivision plan, and a 10-foot side path from the entrance of the future master subdivision plan to the northernmost extent of the property.
The second half of my question on that is typically when I've asked for similar asks of not building something, there's a fee in lieu that we give to the town to say, well, we're not going to do it now because it doesn't make sense, but here's a financial obligation that the town can use when it is deemed necessary in the future. Is the applicant, or is that the situation here?
No, because it was asked for as a zoning condition, there was no fee in lieu offered or required. If the request had been made differently, then that might have been possible, but as a zoning condition, it's not required.
It is not required. Is it possible for it to be offered? I understand it's not required.
Certainly, but it's unlikely. Generally, the reason that you would request a zoning condition like this is because you want to avoid the cost of having to build something to that extent.
No, and I want to hear from the applicant. I
understand. I just had to say it.
No, I fully appreciate that. I want to hear from I want to understand a little bit more about why they're requesting some of these. So they will share.
Sure.
So is it still going to be striped at 24 feet, or will they wait until it's 30 feet?
The road has not been constructed yet. We have plans in review right now that we haven't signed off on yet because currently they've shown a 24-foot wide section on the plans, and our ordinance requires 30 feet. So we can't approve something until this is determined one way or another. So it entirely depends on the outcome of this rezoning case.
Okay, so if the outcome ends up being like 24, it'll be striped at 24, and then we'll have to go back around and do it again for 30. Okay, gotcha.
You got it.
Shelley, are there any concerns from EMS about a 24?
Not to my knowledge, but I'll admit that although fire, police, and police are definitely on the technical review committee, no one made any comments to me about that, but I can specifically ask that question before town council so that we have.
I would imagine not a standard secondary highway is 24 feet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
And we
I
have,
assume they would have said something, so.
we do have a road section that's 20 feet, but that's for a rural residential street. So if they can navigate that, I would imagine they'd be okay with this. You're welcome.
Thanks, Shelley. Would the applicant like to speak?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Board. My name is Patrick Kiernan with Jones & Knosson Engineering, 221 North Salem Street, and I'm here representing the applicant, JVI Building and Development, for this rezoning. Apologies for bringing this back to your attention after several months of thinking it was kind of in the past, but this is an opportunity for us to clean up a few things, that we either didn't interpret correctly originally or didn't know to be issues until we got into the master subdivision plan. As always, I'd like to thank town staff and specifically Shelley. This has been a bit of a saga to get to where we are. So she's been super helpful along the way, getting ready for these public hearings. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. I agree that it's only worth talking about these 4 conditions probably. I was going to talk about transit trail last, but in response to the questions, I think I'll go ahead and address that first and foremost. To speak on the fee in lieu, the entirety of our discussion at town council was in regards to the fact that, so transit trail did not use, it's an existing private gravel drive serving the residents out there that currently live on there. And several years ago, the transportation plan was amended to call a future major collector street north-south corridor through that section. My client wasn't happy about that because, he wasn't included in any discussion. So all of a sudden that appeared on his land, much to his dismay. So in our discussions with town council and, here as well back in December, there was the question of fair and equitable, as far as if this were a widening to an existing street, the developer would only be responsible to improve our side, not the opposite side. Since this is a new street altogether, that UDO ordinance does not apply. So it's more of, well, there's a major collector street built to town standards. The Legacy PUD is obviously to the north of us. However, all of the properties that surround us to the north and to the west are all of one family, the Clement family. What was discussed as the most likely direction for development was that family would likely sell altogether as an assemblage. Whether the entire western side develops and sells or the entire northern side, Transit Trail could bisect it. But either way, there's couple thousand feet of major collector street that right now for my client only serves the future 23 single family lots. So, our proposal was if a development comes along the western side as an assemblage, they could have hundreds of units on that side based on the amount of land over there, let them pitch in a little bit to some of the construction costs. we talked about timing. You know, we would be willing to build it now to satisfy some of the concerns for the town. You know, could we achieve some sort of transportation credits? But there is no transportation fees, so that was not really a possibility. So a fee in lieu sort of defeats the purpose, because we don't necessarily love the idea of building the incomplete road with the striping not being where it is. So it's not that we just do not want to build it right now, it's the cost. So if the fee in lieu is required to, you know, be a bill for my client anyway, we would just go ahead and build the road altogether. The way the condition was originally worded, there was many iterations of the condition. So, you know, regretfully, you know, it was not something that I caught before it moved to council, that what we were talking about the whole time didn't really get verbalized. Before the town council meeting, we had individual meetings with all the council members, and we shared an exhibit with the council members that looked exactly like that detail that Shelley showed, except it showed the 6 feet reduction. It specifically said 2 11-foot lanes and a 2-foot paved shoulder with a 4-foot unpaved shoulder. So even though it's not the 4-foot paved shoulder, it would still be a total of 6 feet of shoulder. In our discussions, we were very clear about what we were asking for. Council was generally receptive of it. In the council hearing, I specifically said what the dimensions were. You know, I mentioned at least 24 feet, 2 11-foot lanes, 2-foot paved shoulder. And the discussion that was had at that meeting was, again, all about, yeah, that seems fair. You know, that is what would be needed to get folks to that development up to the north. It follows about the same dimensions that you see, you know, the rural thoroughfare is kind of what you cited, but Olive Chapel Road, you know, those are 11 to 12-foot lanes, depending on where you are. Some are even smaller with a double yellow. Some of them 2-foot shoulder, if that. Sometimes you get a 6-inch shoulder. It's just kind of, it's not undersized to the point of not working for the 25-ish residents that are going to use it right now, but it would be undersized for a future major collector street that runs north-south. So that's essentially the desire that we're hoping for, is to just clean up the condition to the way that we had intended it and the way that we think that council was understanding of our request initially. Understanding that we're not necessarily seeing eye to eye with town staff, which obviously, you know, you know, it's not lost on me that that's, you know, that's a big deal. We hate to come up here without town staff support, but we feel strongly that town council understood what the request was initially. So that's why we wanted to bring it back here and clean it up. Let me jump back to the beginning. The 60% impervious, that is fairly trivial. That was actually something that Shelley caught after we made the initial submittal, that, hey, the way that this was actually worded ended up being more restrictive than the table of intensities in the UDO would otherwise ask for. We do not anticipate reaching 60% on any particular lot. However, some lots are acre and a half versus some that are, you know, 30,000 square feet. So, you know, the likelihood of hitting 60% on a smaller lot is higher than on a bigger lot. We would just like to average that, you know, like a normal development would. So apologies for that needing to be cleaned up, but that's sort of the context there. Regarding the street stub, since that's the other kind of important one here, it's not that town staff asked us to provide more information on the stream determination that we weren't willing to do. It's just there's a lot of gray area on this matter, mostly because of the physical location of the stream straddling the line between Apex and Wake County. The county buffer call originally came back as not intermittent, so no stream buffer. However, you know, we separately hire an environmental consultant, Terracon, who goes out there, they score, you know, all the features, and our consultant, you know, had told me back then he was surprised that was not an intermittent stream. He thought that it would be. So once the stream or the street stub question came up, it was, well, is there a chance that it would still be viewed as intermittent stream in the eyes of the Corps, of the Army Corps of Engineers, the waters of the U.S.? And that's happened in several scenarios that, you know, that I've seen where either the town of Apex or Wake County doesn't say it's a buffered stream, does not call it intermittent, but the Corps of Engineers might. They might say otherwise. Our consultant thought that these were right on that line of it could go either way. But since the location of the street stubs would put the actual crossing itself off of our property, we can't get the Corps of Engineers to come out to the property. I mean, it's small peanuts to them anyway, so they usually depend on our consultants, to give their determination. But either way, it's not on our land, so they wouldn't be able to permit it anyway. So we're really relying on Terracom's judgment that this could be scored as a feature. The fact that where we're talking about is still on Wake County land, even though our land is now Apex, means that in order to get that section delineated or determined by the county, it would just be getting the same folks to go out there looking at the same stream that they did 2 years ago. So the likelihood that it's going to show any different in the county's eyes is small in our eyes. So again, we just don't really have an avenue to get the Corps out there to give us their determination. And since there is at least some chance that there's an intermittent stream that would need to be permitted, we don't want to provide that street stub. And the other reason for that is because, again, the family that owns all that land to the north, yes, there is a landlocked parcel currently, but it's the same owner, along our northern property line. So both of these parcels are owned by the Clement family, Martha Clement, and the likelihood that they would want to sell this parcel alone for development is extremely low. My client has had several conversations with them. They say that's not going to happen. Eventually they'll all sell together. But furthermore, they have told my client they don't want that street stub pointing out their property. So to us, the likelihood that, yes, interconnectivity can still happen within their property and legacy without providing those additional environmental impacts, that seems like a better alternative to us than the potential of having two stream crossings for a connection that probably is not going to be necessary in the long run. Lastly, the branching cul-de-sacs, it sort of plays into the street stub a little bit because if a street stub were provided, then the issue at hand would cease to exist. But as it currently is, just based on the total length between Transit Trail and really the limits of our developable land, there's a bunch of easements in this corner. So just that length right there, the layout lends itself to two cul-de-sac streets. There's not enough width along Transit at the front to get 2 points of access. So we're dealing with a scenario where there's 1 point of ingress and egress. The UDO ordinance says if you have branching cul-de-sacs, that is a maximum of 1,200 feet. But mostly because of the extremely low density that we have, 23 units on these two streets, that slight increase to 1,450, seems justifiable in our eyes. That will help us to avoid flag lots. Otherwise we would have to pull those cul-de-sacs back and provide flag lots, which are probably less desirable for us and for the town.
Flag lots?
A lot. So there's a 20-foot minimum frontage for any lot, but so if there's a cul-de-sac that you want to get more lots on that frontage, you can have a 20-foot section on a long, skinny driveway that goes towards a house that might be 100 feet away or, whatever it is. So it just kind of avoids that scenario where you have, that many more lots fronting on the same cul-de-sac, that many more driveways and everything. So it's still possible to get the same number of lots. It's just a less desirable layout in our mind. So again, since we now know that after coming to the master, through the master plan process, that was something that, hey, this would be a slam dunk to go ahead and revise if possible, if we have your support. So that's the long and short of it. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
Patrick, thank you very much for the explanation on the street section and the street stub. The street section, I've got a lot of thoughts on that, which I'll share in a minute. But the street stub, did you guys have a preliminary jurisdictional determination done, or?
We did, but on our site, so there's a wetland just downstream of that feature that was called, but our consultant did not call anything other than the wetland in that corner. So I think I know where you're going with that, but it was not ever, since the county buffer call had already come back, I think at that point in our mind, it was an ephemeral stream. So I never really raised the question until all this street stub discussion had come up. But in the original JD, it did not show. But again, our consultant thought that it was possible that the Corps of Engineers could score it as such.
So it didn't show. And to your question,
Well, where I'm going, I just, because in listening to Ms. Mayo's presentation, she said, sans the condition in the zoning, it's an administrative determination that you wouldn't have to make a stub for environmental reasons. You have a wetland and it's the low point of your site where you'd put your SEM. It seems like there's justification that you wouldn't put a road stub there. That makes sense to me as an engineer. Why do we need to make it a zoning condition that staff doesn't approve? I just don't.
Because currently there's a buffer call from the county that is calling it ephemeral. So the town is set. What the first request was, the town could go out there and they could do their own buffer call.
You're saying that it is buffered.
It's not buffered. The county,
wetland there.
There's a wetland, yeah. There's a linear wetland just, let me see, starting about right here. There's a linear wetland that shows about right there. So, the features branch. So, again, just kind of anecdotally, I was told, yeah, there's a decent chance that would score as waters of the U.S. upstream. And then they actually went back out there more recently once we decided to propose this condition. And he reaffirmed what he had told me initially, which was, I still think there's a chance that the Corps would score it as waters of the U.S. Upstream. We didn't really get into the weeds of if, is there any portion of that on our site that would be called just jurisdictional by the Corps, because we have lots that go back there, but we don't have any impacts really near that stream anyway. So if it's not buffer, then it's not going to affect our layout at all. If it was buffer, then it would, but since we're not proposing any crossings, we're just staying kind of away from.
There are cases though where you have a jurisdictional determination by the Corps, but it's unbuffered. So it'd be a linear stream that's unbuffered.
Correct, yeah, it would still be waters of the U.S.
I'm just wondering if how long before you guys will have your JD on it?
So, we don't have any other impacts to speak of with our subdivision. We're staying away, again, our disturbed limits are going to stay, buffered away from that anyway, just on our own, just so we don't get into any impacts. So because we don't have any other environmental impacts, we don't plan on needing a 41404 for that project.
Don't you need a jurisdictional determination for master subdivision submittal?
So I guess we would go off of the one that was there was a sewer outfall that was done about a year ago. So that was when the development plans first came through and when it was buffer called by the county. That was the purpose of that. It hasn't come up as a comment that any additional JDs would be needed. So we've been kind of just rolling along from the same one that was originally done on the property. But if that's a requirement, then, that could be something that kind of further pushes the bill on this. Maybe it will be required. In which case, then he would have to formally make a determination and score it, whether it, he believes it to be waters of the U.S. or not.
why would we not opt for that option to begin with?
Well, so that didn't really come up in our discussions with Shelley. What we have been talking about was, does the town need to go out there and do their own buffer call? And since the town and the county are both conduits of the state in that sense, it was not really seen to be necessary from our end. I will certainly look into it further now that Mr. Akers has brought that up, something that I didn't think about, just the normal subdivision process of the JD being required. It might just be that our sewer outfall was far enough away that it, was not hugely important at that point in time, but maybe with our subdivision, since there are lots in the general vicinity, that it would be needed. So I will definitely look into that. I'll talk to our consultants and see what their thoughts are on the matter before this moves forward.
This is feeling really incomplete, to be honest. Brian and staff have both brought up some really important points that I think really need to be dug into a little better.
Regarding the street sub?
Yeah, before we can really say, yes,
sure,
this needs to go forward, or no, it doesn't.
My feelings on the alternate street section, though, I understand that staff's hands are tied on this, but I think it's really a chink in the armor of Apex that they can't allow other developers to eventually pay their share. So it's going to fall on this developer because the common property line is the street that you're first in the door, so you pay the whole thing. Streets are single-handedly the most expensive piece of what we do in land development, and to have that one developer for 22 lots build a collector street, that's a draconian ask. And most other jurisdictions, they have a transportation fee credit. It's something that you have to ask for. It's an impact fee you have to ask for from the state. Apex doesn't have that, unfortunately, which is good on the developer side. But in situations like this, it kind of hampers the developer because they're on the hook, and you can't ask the other person to pay their half. They just get to ride the coattails of the first in the door. So I understand why you guys are doing it. There's a lot of frontage that makes sense to me. It's still a safe road. It's you're still building half of a secondary highway basically with a smaller asphalt section. But I don't see issues with that. But I understand staff is hampered and their hands are tied by the UDO in this case. So I get that. Sure.
And I think to that point, I would understand that staff's hands are tied. I would not be opposed to taking the applicant's desire to leave and to do the smaller, with the understanding that we're setting a precedent, and would then ask staff to go back. Thank you for that explanation, because it would then ask staff to go back and make sure that we can take the precedent that we're setting and actually turn that into part of the UDO that needs to be the case. And it just makes sense in this.
Yeah, it was similar. There was the Coca-Cola up at the corner of 751. There was a collector street, and they're like, well, we don't want to build it because it's so expensive. And we're like, oh, all right, well, you don't have to build. Well, it would have been nice if they at least boxed it out with all the big equipment there, because at least the road is, the expensive part of the road is there. This could be very similar. They're setting it up so when whoever comes in, they can build the rest of it. It's still a road, but they have their skin in the game too, so to speak. It makes sense.
So it sounds like we need to have additional discussions around UDO, which doesn't really help this case.
But it does help to the point of, depending on where we're going to go, I'm with you that this doesn't, we're almost there, but we're not quite there.
We got a gap. Yeah, we got a gap.
So I think we're all in agreement probably on 419 at least, and possibly 15. That's the question.
Right.
So we can move somewhat forward.
Right.
I think 4 and 19 was the staff approved, recommended,
right.
And I guess the road is the big issue.
So I guess that would come up during our discussions, but as far as questions for the applicant, are there more? No? All right.
If there's one quick thing I can add regarding the street stub, kind of to your point, Mr. Skinner, it might feel a little bit incomplete at this point just because it really has been a little bit recently that this got added. This proposal was 100% to do with Transit Trail initially. That was the only condition that we were moving forward with. Once we made the rezoning, it was, oh, let's clean up this other condition. And then once the town saw the subdivision, then there was a couple other add-ons. So the street stub, Shelley and I have talked to no end kind of about where this is at, and neither of us feel, hugely or that, you know, that strongly either way. I don't think, as far as, you know, if the street stub ends up being required, we can, you know, we can provide it. It's just, there's a pretty good chance that those future developers are going to have, you know, an impact that we don't necessarily think is important. A big part of our argument is just because it's all one family. So yes, it's a landlocked parcel. It very easily could not be a landlocked parcel. We even looked into, you know, would that property owner be willing to recombine into one? So I think we do have a little bit more discussion on our end before this moves forward to a vote from town council. But since, you know, since we don't necessarily think that it's super necessary in the first place, that's why maybe the, you know, the further investigation didn't happen, and it just got a little bit rushed here at the end. So I do apologize for you know, all that. But
Thank you.
I agree with 95% of what Patrick just said. The stub street not necessarily being super necessary. I am not a road person. I am a land use and architecture and landscape person. So I don't always do as good of a job of conveying the urgency of road connectivity as maybe I could. But just because I maybe didn't do a good job of conveying that urgency doesn't mean that town staff as a whole doesn't feel that the road stub is an important piece of the puzzle. We're trying to make sure that we have enough connectivity throughout all of our new neighborhoods and enough options for people to connect that if there's a major accident on one road, people aren't stuck. Or if somebody's house burns down, everybody else on the road can get out without having to worry about things. And those things are very, very important. So not being a road person, I want to just say that I may have done a poor job of expressing the importance of that. I defer almost entirely to Shannon and Russell when it comes to roads, and they tell me what's important, and I say awesome. But the street stub to the north is an issue for us because we don't want to have one built that the Army Corps comes back later and says, well, we don't want it to connect to things because there are streams in the way. Right. And we don't want one to not get built that should be provided and could in the future provide additional connectivity. And to a certain degree, Patrick's right, when this submittal was brought in, it was initially intended to just be the reduction of the street section. We discovered the correction of the maximum built upon area when I was re-reviewing the conditions again. And the first time around, I don't know how many emails we had about the different varieties of conditions, so we just missed that one. And then condition 19 was once we got the subdivision submittal in, we realized that it was longer than it should have been, and this is the only useful way to make that change, like the only reasonable way, especially since they were already proposing a rezoning. And there's urgency. The applicant feels a certain amount of urgency in getting this done quickly because he already has plans for the road. He just has to know whether or not he has to redo them. And he's trying to build houses on those two very large lots, the 2.5 acres. So he asked us to keep going with it instead of pausing it while we waited to get more environmental information from the consultants.
So Shelley, I appreciate the apologies, and also want to say from my vantage point, no apology is necessary.
I just
I
wanted to let you know.
Thoroughly appreciate it and want to say I don't think it's necessary for those listening, for those in the audience. The town, we as a board have voted on connectivity, and so I actually was going to bring up that I'm incredibly concerned that this development is 2 cul-de-sacs. Flat out concerned, and would honestly probably at this point vote against it for that reason. I thought the town was interested in connectivity, as we have voted as a board, as the council has voted, as the staff forwards, that connectivity is the key, and to be bringing in two cul-de-sacs is not where we should be. And so for that reason alone, I just want you to know that I major concerns about that. And so the stub street makes sense. I think, again, there's some unresolved concerns that I think my preference would be that, unfortunately, that you take this back and get some environmental, but I have to be honest and say I would still probably vote against it because it's two cul-de-sacs, and that's not where the town sits in our connectivity. That is where we sat a decade ago. And so there are lots of cul-de-sacs, but going forward, I'm very hesitant to approve cul-de-sacs for the connectivity issues. So just, you have no reason to apologize. Appreciate it, but that is a town standing policy, and we all voted on it.
Just two quick questions, Shelley. Under what circumstance would it be administrative? Is it, all right, so suppose the applicant does get a determination from the Corps, boom, it's a jurisdictional stream. The Corps isn't going to permit a road to nowhere. We know that. So therefore, they would have justification to say, can we be exempt from making a stub at that location? And that makes logical sense.
Mm-hmm.
Part B of that would be, okay, it stays non-buffered, non-stream, and there's a wetland there, and it's the low point of the site, and there's a pond. Could they seek a justification from an environmental feature being a wetland for not doing a street stub?
They could if the wetland extended for the entire portion of the blue area here, and there wasn't a way around it. We brought exactly this question up to the planning director to get her determination, and her determination was that if it's not a buffered stream, then it's not an environmental impact, or it's not an environmental impact that would allow them to get out of being able to do a street stub. If the wetland covered the entire section of it, then we would consider that an environmental impact, and that might go towards allowing them to say, well, we don't have to build this. At that point, the planning director and the water resources director, of course, depending on the size of the wetland and all that stuff, might be willing to say, you're right, this is more of an impact to the environment than it is a benefit to the town. Not a problem. If it comes back as a buffered stream, however, then it would definitely be exempted from that. Well, let me say 90%. I don't ever like to say definite when it comes to land use, but I would say 90% be exempted from having to build a stub street.
So,
and our concern is there's a possibility of moving it further to the west, but our concern is if you set it right here, because that property line is like right here, you set it right here, then you have the potential for two impacts to a stream. And since they're not part of this report that we've gotten, we don't know if those are two real legitimate streams. Maybe they dried up over the last 30 years, because these USGS maps don't get updated that often.
but to your point, though, it'd be if there were streams there. This is all hypothetical based on not having a jurisdictional determination, which most applications at this point do have.
Not always for the off-site streams, though, and at least one portion of that is pretty firmly off-site. But yes, I agree with you. At this point, we normally have a clear-cut jurisdictional determination.
So how do we get that?
The applicant has to, actually, you know what, before I put my foot in my mouth, I'm gonna ask Robert to answer that question, since he is our streams expert and he is here tonight.
Robert, come on down. Give me a second spin.
That is a great question, and I don't know the answer because it's off-site. So like Patrick said, they don't have the legal authority to provide the Corps right of entry to make that determination.
I guess, Robert, this would be a good question, though. If it's a jurisdictional feature up to the property line, then at least you have the knowledge of knowing it's a jurisdictional feature on the property.
Yes.
But if it's not jurisdictional, it's very rare. I've seen it like once ever in my career, but you can have a jurisdictional feature very upland and then it goes into nothing and then it forms again. I mean, I guess it's happened more than once, but
yeah, I see it actually kind of often.
Actually, now that I think about it, I kind of made a
buffers,
brash judgment. It does happen a little bit. So, all right, let me renege on that statement. It happens. But point being, I mean, I feel like, yeah. All right.
I think that's valid that if they could do a PJD or something for what is on their property, And that would, I mean, I guess you still wouldn't know technically what's off-site, but
But you know what's on site.
yeah, yep.
So how do we move this forward?
My feeling is, I don't have any objections with the first three. This one, I'd love to see that one struck. And it seems like it's administrative based on the jurisdictional determination, which I believe should happen. I mean, it seems to me that to vote on it without that information is just it's not right at this point. But I'm in favor of the other three, so I think I'd leave it at the applicant. How do you want to proceed if time is of the essence, which it sounds like it is based on Ms. Mayo's statement?
It is, obviously with no council meeting in July, getting delayed is a 2-month gap. So that was sort of the urgency here. Yeah, I really just need to relook at, because I'm like 95% sure that a PJD was done when we did the outfall. And at that point, I know the wetlands were flagged up in that corner, and I know that on the GPS drawing that was given to us by our consultant, he showed that stream, but it was not called as such. I don't believe it was called as such on the PJD. I know that it was not called buffered by the county. So I hate that I'm coming without an answer to your question, but I definitely want to look into it and talk to him further and be like, when you went out there, was that PJD that was done for the outfall, is that set in stone, the fact that this portion of it is not jurisdictional, is not waters of the U.S. I think it's like a pretty small portion of this blue before that wetland starts. So it's possible that we already have that answer. And I do apologize for not having the answer for you tonight. But I mean, we would like to move this forward to a council hearing in 2 weeks. And I know that doesn't give you guys a whole lot of concrete support here. So I guess all I can really say is that I will discuss this with my client, with the consultants, and we'll definitely try to firm this stuff up before this moves forward to town council.
That sounds fair.
All right. Well, we still have some further dialogue to do on this one. Is there anything else for Patrick? No? Thank you, Patrick. Do we have anybody signed in to discuss this particular topic? No? All right, so I guess there's no need to open the comment section. I'll bring it back to the board for what appears to be a lot of discussion. If I heard right, we have 3 out of the 4 items that could possibly be approved, but we still have some questions about jurisdiction and where there are wetlands and where there are not. How do we move this to council?
I mean, if they want to move to council, I'm more than happy to make a favorable motion, but I'm going to probably say no, with the understanding that the first 3 conditions are fine, but I'm not with the 4th.
Right. That's pretty much where I am as well. So as a board, how do we move it forward or not?
Would you have to break it down per condition?
Amanda?
Well, you're either recommending
I'm not sure we're all gonna agree on 15.
right, I mean, the issue is you're either recommending approval of the rezoning as presented by the applicant, or you're not. And if you're not, then you can state that you're in favor of conditions number blah, 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 but opposed, or, I mean, you're gonna have to provide your reasons for denial. Right. So if you don't have that up on your computer, then I have a paper copy for your reasons for dissent. So, and then your dissent could, state that you were supportive of X, but not of Y, the reason why you ultimately had to recommend denial.
It might be better than to recommend dissent and say the things we do approve, so we're not all here all night writing down.
I like that.
I like how you think.
Dissent, right?
He was acting chair when y'all weren't here. He did really good work.
Nice work.
That's a good question. Are there any implications with a dissenting vote as far as moving forward to council? And the only reason I ask is because, I mentioned a second ago, whether that we can still make our development happen, we can still make the layout work. It is completely secondary to the transit trail condition. We do not want to put that condition in jeopardy. So if this were the town council meeting I feel strongly if it was going towards a decision of no, that my client would say, pull it. Obviously, he wasn't ready to do that. He's not here tonight, unfortunately, to discuss, but I would say there's a non-zero chance that, without more evidence and more support, from JD and all that it could get pulled at the council meeting anyway, if the discussion is similar. I just don't want to put in jeopardy the original condition. So if it's a dissenting vote, it's okay. I mean, I obviously would hope to have as much support as we can moving forward, but I fully would understand, the reasons behind the no vote. But I just wanted to ask that question and make that point.
I don't think a dissenting vote at this point is necessarily going to affect the project.
I don't think so either.
Because, I mean, the council, they have a mind of their own, and we sometimes unanimously dissent things, and they come back and approve.
Yep.
Being that we're an advisory board, we don't have any legal authority over your project, so I don't think the dissent, I mean, really it becomes administrative for all of us at this point.
Okay.
Well said, Jim.
Yeah, I appreciate
Well
it.
said. Thank you. So coming back to the discussion we were having, it sounds like we were dissenting, but had a lot of approvals in that. Amanda, how do we really write this up then? We're saying no, but we want to say yes to X, Y, and Z, and council then looks at the entire portion?
I would suggest that we say we dissent.
How
And-
about we have somebody write one letter of all the things we approve, going as a letter with our dissent to the town council that they can read, that they formally shows the things that we do approve, versus all of us having to go through each item.
So the dissenting form is only needed for those who vote against a motion. So if your motion is for approval, then if someone's motion is for approval and then there's people that vote against that, then there has to be the reasons why you're voting against an approval of the voting against recommending approval. If the recommendation to council is for denial, then the only people who need to sign a dissent form is those who don't agree with the denial.
But I think the point is that.
But that you can include a note to town council in your recommendation. So the motion could be, we move to either approve or deny for the following, the motion maker can include those things in the motion.
All right. That being said, do I have a motion on 23CZ09?
So then I guess I'll make a motion to deny case 23CZ09. Really, we could just leave it at that, and then our note can say the reasonings of why.
Okay. So I have a motion from Tim. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Tina seconds. All right. All in favor of denying, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, so we pass, we deny unanimously. Now we need to come up with our reasonings of what we want. Is that right, Amanda, if I heard you right?
If you would like to include a note to town council, then I can include that in the planning board report to staff council. Planning board report to town council, I just need to know what
We just need to collectively express our thoughts.
yes, but that would not be on a dissent form, because again, that's votes that are dissenting to the motion. No one dissented the motion, everyone, it was unanimous, so I can include that in a separate text on the planning board report to town council.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
I think we all agree on 419, is that correct?
Yep.
I think we probably all agree on 20.
Yep.
Yeah. Of being no, I guess, on 20.
Right.
Sticker. I guess 15 is the question.
Typical street. I mean, in our conversation, it sounded like we needed to have the UDO really looked at so that developers are not paying for an entire road and everybody else can come and add their little toothpicks and get in as where they're paying for their section. So how we articulate that so that council can say, hey, we need to go back and fully revisit this and make it equitable to all developers. You know, because there was talking here about impact fees from the state. I mean, who wants to pass up money that the state is gonna offer?
The problem becomes, you know, if JVI was developing from the entirety, from the north to south, in the roadway, you could figure out a way to pay for it, right?
Right.
But when you have a smaller project, that's just a little piece of it, I would say that you would need to be responsible for that one piece of the
Right, one
road
piece.
versus putting a ribbon all the way up and doing the entire thing, which they're not doing anyways.
Exactly.
It's just, you have a small project going into a major collector area and they're responsible for it. It just, I understand where it's at. So it either, one of two things needs to happen, either go with it or it needs to be revised to where it's no longer a major collector. I don't think that that should be the case.
No, that shouldn't be the case.
Right?
We agree.
Yeah. I think
And it just comes down to, it's a monetary thing.
Yep.
If money was no issue, there's no reason to not build it.
Right.
But it could be detrimental to the project.
I agree. So Amanda, how do we have a revisiting of the UDO in regards to what's equitable to a developer?
Could we approve?
I think that's part of a longer conversation that's going to involve many more people. So that's something we will have to provide some follow-up information with you about. And just to clarify, the money that does not come from the state, those transportation impact fees are impact fees that are paid by developers. But Apex is not authorized to do that. It would take state enabling legislation in order to, certain municipalities have that, Apex does not. And so it would require an act of the General Assembly to give us that authority.
All right, thank you for that clarification.
So I'm wondering if we include in our write-up that we agree with the applicant in this case, like that, so that piece is, you know, if the council takes into consideration that piece is approved, with the understanding that we are setting a slippery slope of precedent, and that we are making this approval with the understanding that we need to revisit this, and that is indeed a longer conversation, but that this needs to be a priority, that this can't start the spiral of these sorts of requests coming, that we need to deal with this at a legislative level.
We don't want to create inconsistencies with our transit and connectivity, but in this scenario, that is a very big ask for a small project.
I guess my point on that particular condition 15 though is, so long as the UDO is written the way it is, this will always come up in front of this board, and we're just a recommendation to council. So I don't see it as a legal precedence, as a recommendation saying, yes, we see you, Mr. Applicant, for a myriad of cases of this is a little bit much. And so while the staff can't support it, we as a planning board looking out for the planning, we can take a higher level and say, well, this does make sense. I would think that's within the realm of recommendation.
Right.
But I don't think we can change the way it is without, to Ms. Bunce's point, it takes statutory change, and this government probably ain't gonna do it.
No, we obviously can't change it, but I think we make the recommendation.
Right.
I would suggest that we make the recommendation that this be revisited at the legislative level, because we will have more cases.
Yeah.
I'm not, I feel like we're talking about two different things. So you're stating that the town should investigate seeking legislative approval for transportation impact fees, or are you saying that the UDO should be revised to look at small projects and their responsibility for how much of the road needs to be built? Those are two separate things.
I'm saying I work in maternal health policy. I can't answer that question, but what I am saying is that we clearly have an issue. Argue both. We clearly have an issue and an inconsistency that needs to be addressed. That has come up in this case, will likely come up in additional cases, especially with that are zoned RR, and that we want to deal with this.
I think Shannon may have something important to share. I'd like to hear her thoughts on this.
Thanks.
I just want to be clear, and other staff can correct me if I'm misspeaking for them, but I don't think the case is that our hands are tied here with our recommendation. Our recommendation is that we feel a new road accepted into the town's transportation network should be built to the town's standard. We create issues if we allow anything less.
So I see that as the staff's hands being tied. Because we have to follow the UDO says one thing and we cannot deviate from that. We don't want to deviate from that. And so seeing that we have a concern that there should be a deviation, you all can't make that deviation. We can recommend that there's a deviation. The council can decide if there should be a deviation. But when we start deviating, I think that's like, you all as staff can't deviate, but I think if we start deviating as a body, that's a problem. And that needs to have a legislative correction. And to Amanda's point, I don't know. I hear Ryan saying both. I don't know whether it's UDO or legislative, if we need to talk to Jill, something, I don't know. But I think we make a recommendation with those suggestions. I hear you that you don't think your hands are tied, but you have to follow the UDO. There's no other, thankfully your hands are tied.
Well, regardless of whether the UDO said it or not, I think staff have discussed.
Sorry, Siri has opinions.
She always does. We've discussed the request. We have looked at the implications for precedent. We've looked at the implications for the transportation network, as well as, you know, the disruption to the people who will be living here, trying to use this roadway in the future. And we do not recommend deviating from the standard. If you choose to recommend that, understood. But our recommendation is not to approve that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is what I have. Please, board, correct me if I'm wrong in my summary. The planning board recommends denial of the rezoning with the inclusion of condition number 20, and that is the no street step to the north. The board agrees with the conditions that staff supports, as well as condition number 15, which is this reduction of the typical street section.
Do we agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yes. Thank you.
Amanda, I have completed a dissent sheet. I realize that's not incredibly proper protocol, but I did want it noted, my concerns about connectivity. So I can do that any other way, but I wanted you to know I filled out a sheet.
All right, so that closes out 23CZ09. And we move on then to item 3. Shelley's going to talk to us about public hearing and possible motion regarding case 23CZ11, the Smith Farm PUD Phase 5.
Hopefully this one's a little easier. So this rezoning is to amend Phase 5 of the Smith Farm PUD. You guys are probably familiar with Smith Farm by now. It runs along the eastern side of Richardson Road, just south of 64. The two parcels that are being rezoning they actually touch 64. They have one very tiny little spot right here, but primarily have their access off of Core Banks, and will eventually be provided an access to the north here as well. They measure about 30.11 acres-ish. And the lots are primarily vacant and wooded with several streams throughout. So the existing zoning district is planned unit development conditional zoning. The proposed is also planned unit development conditional zoning. Since we're just amending it, we're not actually changing the underlying district at all. This is still consistent with the 2045 land use map that calls for high density residential, office, employment, and commercial services in the general area. And it's inside corporate limits. So when this actually started with Sweetwater, and Sweetwater's Phase 10 is all of this stuff right through here on the western side of Richardson Road, just south of 64, like right where that intersection happens. Phase 10 is currently under review. Some parts of it, some pieces have been approved for work, but it's currently under review. And during that review, staff was looking more closely, again, our transportation folks, were looking more closely at connectivity, just like we were talking about a minute ago. Core Banks is located down here that road is already connected. It already stubs out to the west. So we started looking at Ingold Drive, right through here. Now, Ingold Drive is a private street. It's going to be part of the shopping center right there, and it's going to connect through. But staff was looking at this as a way to provide additional connectivity to the west towards Smith Farm, so that all of the traffic doesn't have to come through Core Banks, which is a relatively smallish road right there, and so that we wouldn't have pedestrians from way up here in this corner having to walk all the way across a fairly busy commercial section in order to access it. So that the request was made, but I hope you can see this pale gray line that kind of snakes up along through here. That's a retaining wall that gets up to be about 24 feet tall in some places, 20 feet right where Ingold Drive is going to come across. And the only way to make the slopes work, there's actually kind of a little divot between Smith Farm and this portion of Sweetwater, so that we have kind of a baby ravine or a dip anyway, right there. And in order to make this work, the developers for Sweetwater actually need permission to grade into the buffer, or what might be the future buffer, of Smith Farm Phase 5. So the purple is Smith Farm, everything else is Sweetwater. And Peter's the applicant. He might be able to do a better job of explaining the engineering portion behind this than I am. But my understanding is that in order to remove that retaining wall so that you can get in there and make those slopes match and actually get a road connection through there in something resembling reasonable topography, that you have to go in and you have to basically grade through a large section of the buffer for Smith Farm. Smith Farm's existing PUD states that, where'd it go? All perimeter buffers shall be provided in accordance with the Apex UDO. Town of Apex UDO does not allow grading within required buffers, not if it's going to be RCA and not if it's going to be standalone. So if there's existing vegetation out there of any kind that's greater than 1 inch in diameter, the UDO does not allow that to be disturbed or graded unless there is literally a road portion going through. But in this case, in order to get the amount of grading that would be needed for this, it goes beyond what the UDO typically allows for grading. So this, given the topography concerns, it's more extreme than that. So the applicant, the Sweetwater developers have reached out to the owners of this portion of Smith Farm and have asked them to amend their PUD. And they have asked them to add the following language. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but essentially it says that for these two particular parcels, because of some challenges, but especially ones that involve topography, the PUD will allow the eastern perimeter buffer to be graded. Each of those buffers will be, each buffer will be replanted at the time of development and still count as RCA if a future land use requires such a perimeter buffer. The buffer will be in accordance with the UDO, and in no case shall such buffer exceed 20 feet in width. The seed and plant species used to stabilize the disturbed area and or any replanting will be in accordance with the Town of Apex Design and Development Manual. At this point, there's no proposed use for Phase 5. We don't have a development plan in front of us, so we don't actually know if there's going to be a required perimeter buffer between Sweetwater. If there's another Sweetwater and Smith Farm, if there's another shopping center that comes in right next to it, there may not be a required buffer. But if somebody comes in with a different use that the UDO does require one, they need to have this just to make sure they don't accidentally get messed up. The Apex Environmental Advisory Board did hold a pre-application meeting for this on April 20th. They did speak lengthily about this, and they recommended, and their only recommendation was that the graded buffer be revegetated after grading to a minimum type B buffer standard, except in areas where the road will cross. Now, during the discussion, it was clear that they meant immediately after grading. That wording didn't get into their condition, And staff doesn't mess with their condition wording, but that was the implication at the time. The applicant did not include that in his condition, but the soil will have to be stabilized afterwards, so there will be at least seeding of some kind required. And if it's steeper than a 3-to-1 slope, they'll actually have to plant additional vegetation on there as well. So actual plants, not just seeding the slope. Planning staff has reviewed this and recommends approval as proposed. If you have any questions, as I said a moment ago, the applicant is here to answer them for you. We'd be happy to help. If you have any questions for me, I'm always here to answer them.
Any questions for Shelley?
This is not a removal of the entire buffer. This is just for allowing for the grading and then replanting, but the buffer still remains there.
Right. We don't know that there will be one in the future because it just says per the UDO. So depending on the uses, but there's no change to what kind of buffer would be there. It's simply saying we're going to allow them to grade so that we don't have a weird connectivity problem in the future and we don't have an even stranger looking retaining wall. And so that everybody can actually access things appropriately.
Thank you, Shelley. Did the applicant want to speak?
Good evening. Peter Knosson, Jones Knosson Engineering. We are the consultant engineer for Andy Clark as well as the Smith family on this rezoning. Thank you, Shelley, for that presentation. I did get a kick out of it being a divot. I never heard that term before, but I loved it. But anyway, there's a natural draw basically that runs the property line. And in order for the retaining wall, as Shelley mentioned, it's over 20 feet high. And it basically, you wouldn't even be able to extend Ingold Road because of the presence of that wall. In order to remove that wall, they're looking basically grade between the properties, and obviously that would require removal of the buffer. I've seen the grading plan from the Sweetwater design team. It basically, the grading is going to extend into the Smith Farm property anywhere probably about 40 to 50 feet. Because it is about a 20-foot fill. You go to 2-to-1 slope, that's 40 feet. So it is going to be a significant extension, so to speak, into the property to provide the grading that's necessary to remove a good portion of that wall. Portion of the wall will still remain, but it will allow it to be removed on Ingold Drive, so that could be extended. Again, and just to confirm, we are in agreement to revegetate that buffer in accordance with the UDO requirements. If there is like use, there will be no buffer. And the only point I want to just state there is no buffer on the Sweetwater property. That was removed in a rezoning, so that buffer requirement again was removed. So really all we're asking for, if there's like use, to remove the buffer. There won't be a buffer per the UDO, but if there is a requirement, say it goes multifamily on the Smith Farm, there would be a buffer that would be revegetated at that location. So I think it's a pretty straightforward request, hopefully. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have with regard to this PUD amendment.
So you're looking at just seeding at this point, so you'll go roughly 50 feet into the adjoining property, scrape that down, clean it up, and then you're going to seed for now?
Yes.
And then if it happens to be like type construction, we're going to erase the buffer because it never existed. If it happens to be multifamily or high density residential, then you're going to go back at that point and go back and replant. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Peter, I do have a question. I guess I'm kind of confused. Is the wall there now, or are you saying to get the grade to work, you'd have to put a wall to not grade into the buffer? Is that?
The current Sweetwater design includes a wall. There's no wall there yet. It has not been constructed, but the wall would be required to protect what would be the buffer on the Smith Farm piece.
So the ask here is saying, well, we won't build the wall. Instead, we'll stub the street and then grade out into somebody else's property to allow a future connection without a wall. Is that right?
That's correct. My understanding from talking to the folks with the Sweetwater team is there will be a wall required, but it won't be required the entire length that is shown, that Shelley showed on that plan.
This is going to allow for easier future connectivity.
Correct.
It seems like a win
Yeah.
for all parties if they don't have to build a 20-foot retaining wall for that length, as well as Smith Farm getting more connectivity, and then what we've been talking about this evening is increasing interconnectivity between developments. It's especially these two coming off of 64, limiting driveway access off of 64. It's important that they connect.
Yes.
So it seems like a good plan.
It doesn't happen in all cases, but in this case, it is the right thing to do. It really is.
I think the only question I have is, since the EAB made a note in the discussion that this happened immediately, and I understand it was not included in the PUD, is that something that we can recommend being added? Is that something that you all feel like, was it just accidentally left off, or?
We fully intend to stabilize the area. We do not want to replant a buffer that may not be needed if there is like use. So right now there is no current land plan for the Smith Farms PUD. I don't even know if really they've gone out to put it under for sale yet. But no, we do not want to replant the buffer.
So it's per UDO, correct? So what would be the concern if per UDO there needed to be replanting? And so what would be the concern of planting immediately? And Shelley, I want to make sure I understood the EAB's, I want to make sure the EAB's concerns are heard and accommodated. And
So the concern so the issue that Peter's bringing up right now is that without a proposed future land development plan for the Smith Farm pieces, there's no way to determine what the use next door to Sweetwater will be, or what the buffer size or requirements will be. Until we have some kind of proposal for the development on the purple piece, we don't know if it'll be a 10-foot buffer, a 20-foot buffer. We don't know if it'll be required at all. If they put, I don't know, I'm pulling things out of thin air, a food lion behind the Harris Teeter. If they decide to put another grocery store backing up against it, they won't have a buffer of any kind.
did the EAB understand? Again, I'm just trying to make
They
sure
did
that
understand
they understood that.
Their concern is that we have no idea how long we might be going without the ecosystem benefits of the trees that are currently there. So if it's 5 years and there are no trees planted in that area, they said they made it seem as though that wasn't as big of a concern for them, but they wanted to have the ecosystem's benefits from additional trees as soon as they possibly could. And I think their determination was, to them, it didn't matter as much if the developer was potentially out a significant amount of money by planting new trees back now, as long as we got those ecosystems benefits.
Okay.
And to be fair, that is what their board is tasked with, with reviewing.
Right.
So I think that they intended for it to be clear that that their recommendations say this is going to be planted back ASAP. But when they were trying to figure out the phrasing of it, it seemed that there was a lack of clarity involved, and trying to wrangle everybody onto one path didn't end up with exactly the language we had thought we were going to get. So I think that some of them were fine with it just being planted back to a specific standard immediately, and some of them were fine with any kind of trees. I'm unclear.
No, that's helpful. I encourage them. Can you encourage you to encourage them to be as clear as possible? Thank you.
We can't
Thank
work
you.
off of intent. We got to work
Right.
on what's written. So
Right.
that would help. All right. Do we have anybody in the audience that signed in for this particular motion? All right, then I will bring it back to the board for discussion of the possible motion.
This one's easy. I'll make a motion to approve 23 CZ 11 Smith Barn Phase 5 PUD amendment as presented by staff.
I have a motion from Ryan. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, thank you very much. All in favor of passing 23 CZ 11, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, that passes unanimously. On to new business, item 1. Michael wants to give us an update on the senior housings. Actually, this is a motion for proposed affordable housing incentive zoning.
Good evening, Board. I'm Michael Linsenmeyer, the Senior Housing Specialist in the Town of Apex Housing Program, and I'm joining you this evening to provide an overview of the Affordable Housing Incentive Zoning Policy. The policy is being developed jointly by the Planning Department and the recently established Community Development and Neighborhood Connections Department. While the policy today is in draft form, the Housing Advisory Board is scheduled to vote on their recommendation this Friday, June 16th. In early 2021, Town Council voted unanimously to adopt the Town of Apex Affordable Housing Plan. This plan is a 10-year roadmap which outlines the town's role in ensuring housing affordability to attract and retain a diverse population. It details the purpose and key findings of a housing needs assessment, which inform the goals and recommendation of the plan. And the plan also provides an action plan for implementation. The plan was developed over an 8-month process that was guided by the efforts of a steering committee, housing professionals, and by engaging with residents. By adopting the plan, Town Council provided direction to establish the Affordable Housing Incentive Zoning Policy as one of the implementation items. In the early phase of the policy's development, the housing program fell within the town's planning department. In January of this year, the program was moved to the Community Development and Neighborhood Connections Department, and with that being said, the policy will remain an ongoing project between the two departments, along with the guidance from input from the Housing Advisory Board. The draft, as you see it today, also includes guidance from an outside consulting firm, Community Planning Insights. The primary purpose of the policy is to encourage rezoning and planned unit development applicants to provide affordable housing or workforce housing units within private developments. The document sets forth clear recommendation criteria, applicability standards, and a menu of zoning-based, non-financial, and financial incentive options for developers to choose from in exchange for providing the units. The main goals of the policy are to address Town Council's high priority area of increasing the affordable housing supply within the Town of Apex, so that as the population continues to grow, we're able to provide quality housing for the workforce and the aging segment of the population. By implementing the policy, we'll be able to expand mixed income communities, which will allow us to attract and retain a diverse population. As part of the negotiation process, we hope to offset the potential revenue loss to developers in exchange for providing the public service to our residents. The policy applies to zoning districts that allow residential and mixed-use development, and applicants who meet the minimum policy standards may apply for incentives through the rezoning and PUD approval process. All incentives are subject to Town Council approval, and the affordable housing zoning condition will be included in the staff report to Planning Board and Council. On this slide, you'll see the minimum standards from which staff will base their zoning condition to the applicant. As staff receives applications that include at least 20 residential units, we'll recommend that at least 5% of the total units be reserved for income-restricted buyers or renters for a minimum affordability term. It will then be up to the developer to decide how they want to target the affordability. However, we have set the maximum target of 135% of the area median income for ownership developments and the maximum target of 100% of the area median income for rental developments. The income limit must be adjusted for family size and will be based on the limits published by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. For example, the 2023 area mixed income limit area median income limit for a family size of 4, and the Raleigh MSA is 117,000. The way in which this will all come together is that housing staff will participate on the technical review committee and will work side by side with the planning department. We'll take part in the pre-application meetings and provide high-level feedback. Then we'll meet one-on-one with the applicant to go over the policy and to discuss the recommendation based on the applicability standards. We'll then move into the affordable housing proposal step, which allows the applicant to demonstrate what's feasible and what's not, and then we'll discuss how we can incorporate one or more of the incentives. From there, the zoning condition will be drafted and included in the staff report, and the final step will be to involve town's legal staff to execute and record a restrictive covenant prior to the certificate of occupancy being issued. Here you'll see a list of the available incentives. The zoning-based incentives will most likely be what we'll see the most of, and the expedited processing incentive will only be available to applicants that have proposed 10% of the units as affordable housing. The financial incentives are strictly regulated by the North Carolina Housing Authorities Law, which sets the minimum unit count at 20% of all units and sets very deep income targeting. Keeping that in mind, the available financial incentives will likely be tied to developments benefiting from other state and federal programs, such as the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. So far in Apex, we have 2 developments of that nature in the pipeline, resulting in the production of nearly 250 units at or below 60% of the AMI, both for a 30-year term. And the table on this slide provides a summarized version of what's been committed to date. And the great news here is that staff has been road testing the policy in its draft form, and we've had positive results. The overall process started several years ago in the planning department, and since drafting this policy, the number of units committed has basically doubled. Staff recommends approval of the policy draft as provided, knowing the Housing Advisory Board may have minor changes, if any. However, if the planning board has any feedback, staff can provide that to the HAB. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.
I had not seen that doubled, and I literally almost jumped out of my seat when you said that. That is amazing. So I serve on the Housing Advisory Board as a liaison of this body, and am overjoyed that we are here. It has been a long and laborious process, but I'm also so pleased at the process that we took to get here. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think anyone sitting at the table thinks it's perfect, but we were committed to, we have these conversations about needing affordable housing, and committed to having something that everyone at the table could agree would move us forward, and then coming back and revisiting to see how this implemented. And I will share that at many of the advisory board meetings, I would refer back to many of the conversations that we had here and the questions we were getting from developers here about, if we only had this, or if we had this question about this, or if we could do this. So I am overjoyed and so excited that we are here. I cannot wait.
Me too.
Michael, I have a few questions. So this policy is to allow flexibility in cases that are getting rezoned. What we've seen to date is people looking to rezone, county property into the city or the town zoning districts. Is it changing the base zoning district even further to get more setback relief, et cetera, through adopting these policy metrics? Or is it basically what we've seen to date, just fleshing out more language to it instead of us kind of sitting up here to what Ms. Tina was saying a minute ago, we're like, what does that mean? What is an AMI? What is all this? Is it just kind of defining what we've already been seeing, I guess?
Yeah, so the affordable housing proposal will be added as a zoning condition to the rezoning case or the PUD document. I think it's definitely possible to, given how it's a zoning-based incentive, to change it to a higher density, if that's what you're asking. But, it almost always going to be a zoning condition.
I'm more of a carrot and sticks kind of guy, whereas inclusionary zoning, in my opinion, is a stick. something where you dangle a carrot and say, well, if you want to do zoning, you can do that. But while you're at it, you can get even more if you do this, right? But what I don't like is like when you say, well, if you want to play in our town, you have to do this. Well, in my opinion, that just means, well, the rest of the units that aren't affordable are just going to become that much more unaffordable to afford the affordable units. You know what I mean? I want to see a lower price point for all of the units, you know, more density, more use of the land we have. I don't like a stick approach, but this doesn't feel like that. I don't think that it's written that way.
No, this is a voluntary policy, and we get involved as the applications come in, and we're by no means, forcing anyone's hand at this, but we are trying to use these incentives to encourage affordable housing development.
Yeah, I've been happy with seeing what we have seen too.
And it's, to your point, it's more to, the conversations that we have here on like, should we offer 10%? Should we offer 5%? The questions that we were already getting and trying to decipher, not very well, not very consistently.
I mean, I hear
right?
60%, 80, 100%, 100%. I'm like, oh gosh, that's somebody that's rich. Well, you just said 117,000. That's to, blue collar worker household, that's.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of who we're trying to target with this policy. Folks that work for a living, but don't make enough to afford a market rate home in Apex, sort of that middle income gap, at least with this policy. Through the affordable housing plan, we have some other measures that will go and try and target deeper affordability, but this is really about addressing the workforce needs.
I don't know if I don't know if I would say it's a carrot or a stick, but I think it answers some of the questions that have come before us consistently. That's what I would say.
Any other questions for Michael? I love it. I love it. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I have a motion from Tina. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Keith? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? We love it.
All right, thank you.
Passes unanimously. Thank you. And I need one more motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Alyssa, do I have a second?
Second.
Tina, second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion adjourned. Thank you, folks. That was very good.